let's look at pulley systems quickly. So right here we've got a single pulley. It is known as a redirector. And that's simply because this force, which is essentially gravity, which wants to go down, I can turn into something that is a challenge for me in a opposite direction. I'm now fighting gravity by pulling down. Yes, because of the pulley. It has redirected gravity so that rather than gravity going downwards, I'm fighting it by also pulling downwards. That's how a pulley system works. And with a 1-to-1 ratio here, I'm going to need to move this table just to the side. So as I pull down, hopefully you'll be able to see that I've got 100 showing up on my scale, and that is also 100 on there. I am dealing with the same load as it, because that is the thing, obviously, that I'm fighting. Minus a little bit of friction that will be occurring between this string and the pulley itself. That'll be exactly the same as that. And that is a 1-to-1 pulley. It is a redirector. You'll see it in cable stacks all over the gym world. You'll see it within machines. You may even have bought one yourself for home workouts during lockdown. It is a 1-to-1 pulley. It doesn't change the load. You're dealing with it exactly the same as if it were a dumbbell or a barbell. It's just being redirected so that I could pull in a whole variety of different ways. I could pull over here. I could pull it vertically straight down. As long as I'm not lifting it back upwards, because then I don't need the pulley so much again. Although I could pull it over in this. You can see it creates a bit of force now that is trying to pull the whole pulley this way. And that's because this force I'm producing is no longer just vertical. If I go to there, it will, assuming it doesn't get caught on this guy, it'll drop back to kind of normal. But I can use a 1-to-1 pulley to redirect force in pretty much whatever direction I want to. Now for something a little weirder, because, well, I'm going to use the same single pulley, but we're going to find that this looks rather different. So what I've done this time is attach the rope in this instance, the string in this instance, or the cable if you're thinking of it in those terms, to the top here. I put it through this single pulley and I've attached the weight to the pulley itself. I am then going to pull up on this guy. Now the question is, so this is the same, right? Like we've got one single pulley, so it should be the same as the last experiment, no? No. And you're about to see why, which is cool. Look at the distance I have to travel. My arm might be out of shot. This didn't happen previously. And if I look at what force is on here, I don't know if you'll be able to see this from that far, but it's half. I am producing half minus the friction again. So it's a bit more than half because I'm overcoming friction. But I'm producing a lot less force with the same pulley system, but it's not the same pulley system. And here's why. This force right here, this 100 grams, what's it being divided into? Two different attachments, this one and this one, which have an equal amount of tension as each other in it. So as I pull up, this over here, attached, provided the thing it's attached to is sturdy and won't go anywhere, it's doing half the work for me. But if I'm having to produce half the force, guess what? I end up in that same thing we've discussed on inclined planes. I have to travel twice the distance in order to move that guy up. So this particular pulley is now 2 to 1. 1, 2 to 1, 2 to 1. And one of the ways you can tell this, if your pulley system, if the pulley itself moves up and down, in other words, it's not fixed. In the previous one, the pulley was fixed up here. The pulley didn't move. When the pulley moves, we can count the number of ropes, strings, cables, whatever attached to it. And we know that they're dividing the load by the number of movable pulleys or the number of strings, cables attached to the movable pulleys. So we can see the pulley moves, which means this must be being divided between the two strings attached. Therefore, this has a 2 to 1 ratio, and you can see that. And I never really get bored of this. I think it's super cool. It's so strange and so cool, and it's not what your intuition would think, or at least it's not what my intuition would think, but it's demonstrably the case. And that's awesome. And finally, we get to complex looking pulley systems like this one here. Now, you could actually put together an infinite number of pulley systems, but this is the one that you'll see the most often after the 1 to 1 and the 2 to 1, and it's called a 4 to 1. And we can count these guys. This is the movable pulley. So this is the thing that's going to move up and down, not this one, so we can ignore this. But how many strings are attached to the movable one? 1, 2, 3, 4. It is 4 to 1. We can just count strings attached to the pulley that moves, and that is the mechanical advantage we have. There's still 100 grams on this. Now, if I've got a mechanical advantage of 4 to 1, then for this 100 grams, I'm only going to need to produce 25 grams, or the equivalent thereof of force, because remember, mass isn't a force, but I'm going to need to produce a quarter of it. But the only way I can get away with producing a quarter of it in physics, if we're to conserve work, force times distance, is that I must travel a much greater distance, 4 times, than this thing is going to travel in that time. That's the only way I can get away with producing so much less force in relationship to this guy. And so what you're going to see here is that this doesn't actually have, I don't have a long enough bit of string for this to go all the way to the floor. So what you'll see here is that's as low as that gets. But look at the distance I can travel relative to the distance it travels. I don't even know if that'll still be in shot. Look at this, it barely goes anywhere relative to me. And that has a rather cool implication that I can show you on this. We mentioned this in the inclined planes video. But look at this spring. I don't know if you'll be able to see it all that well, but I can move this relatively quickly, and this spring, the amount of force on this guy, pulling in this direction, doesn't change that much relative to the speed that I'm going through this with, right? Now, what happens if I take that off of there and I do the same act with the 100 grams itself? So let's take it off of the bottom and I put that onto the spring. Can you see how quickly, it doesn't take barely any change for that spring to move around. And yet, when I move it on a 4 to 1 pulley system, the acceleration and deceleration that the object attached to the pulley goes through is really different. If I do the same movement, see how it's not creating the same conditions. So the speed we lift at, when we say, oh, you know, we always use 3-1-3-1, or the tempo doesn't matter, or whatever the fuck people want to say about these particular things. Well, we can't even say that that is true unless we state the type of machinery or load that we're dealing with. And we can't call all cables are the same now either, can we? Because we've just seen they differ. And this is true in machines too. Many machines have ratio style things. And some machines even allow you to have a 1 to 1 when you lift at the same time, but 2 to 1 when you lift with one arm, or 2 to 1 becomes 4 to 1. So unless we standardize for the reality that is the physics of pulley systems and loads, I don't know how we can draw conclusions, hard and fast conclusions at least, from, oh, this research found this when they used this machine, as though all machines were the same as each other. Not all pulley systems are the same as each other, let alone when we get into the complexities of machine. So you saw that study that went, oh, we used a lying leg curl versus a seated leg curl, and we found that the seated one was better, as though, A, all seated leg curls are the same as each other, as though all prone leg curls are the same as each other. Unless there is an engineering breakdown of those machines, where they're difficult, where they're easy, where they demand the greatest torque and the least amount of torque. And things like the tempo that they lift those things at, relative to the type of machine or type of pulley or whatever. Unless you do all of those things, you cannot draw the conclusion that is often told that you can. And it's obvious once you play with some kids' engineering sets. We got to do better.